Hey everybody, Rob Veno here. Thursday afternoon chat with Teddy Covers of Sports Memo and other various sites. Teddy and I have been at Sports Memo together for nearly 2 decades now over there with our work. So you can always find us at sportsmemo.com, or you can find a lot of my other stuff at robvenosports.com. Today we're going to do what we've done the past couple of Thursdays. We're going to go through some key games here, maybe some key line moves. We're going to cut this one a bit short because we both have prior commitments here. For Teddy, it's radio. For myself, it's Parents' Day out at Mizzou in Columbia, Missouri. So I'll be heading off to get on a plane here to go see that dreaded Missouri-Delaware State game, TC. What do you think about that one?
It should be a heck of a contest. I hope you enjoy yourself.
Yeah, we'll be there acting like fans and parents of son number 2. So anyway, let's get to this week's card. It's a game that's climbed and continues to climb, actually, point spread-wise, is 323-324 Penn State against Michigan. Last week we saw Michigan get a bit of a tussle from Colorado. I know that Colorado and Penn State are somewhat different offensively, although Joe Moorhead, the new offensive coordinator at Penn State, is trying to bring more of a passing attack to the Nittany Lions. They win last week against Temple. This game opened 17, Teddy. It's up to 19 in most areas now. We haven't seen any take-back yet on the Penn State side. I don't know that we anticipate take-back, especially with the potential absence of Saquon Barkley, the top running back for Penn State. But just briefly, give me your thoughts on this Big Ten Conference game. We're getting a few Big Ten Conference games this week, non-conference action over. Time to get in and play against these opponents where sometimes the scores become lower and the hitting gets harder. Penn State, Michigan, you think Harbaugh's team can cover that big of a number?
I know I don't want Penn State in this game. Let me start with that. I mean, it's been a pretty clear track record under James Franklin. All right, Penn State has played 9 road games under Franklin. They've lost all 9, and the only point spread they covered in any of those road games was at Pitt in week 2. As we've seen since then, A, Pitt can't cover the pass, and B, Penn State they were down 21-0 in that game. They came in through the back door at the end and made things interesting, but they were beaten. They certainly didn't get a whole lot of stops in that contest. So with Penn State trying to play fast, and with that type of a track record, what it does, it sets up the Wolverines to score a whole bunch of points. And, of course, Trace McSorley, can he handle a tough defense on the road? I'm not convinced that he can. And Michigan, week after week, I love teams like the Wolverines because they're scoring on all 3 phases of the game. The teams that score non-offensive touchdowns tend to be undervalued because the markets say, oh, that's lucky. Oh, well, they didn't move the ball on offense, therefore they're not that good. I tend to take the other view on that. I love teams that score non-offensive touchdowns because people do view them as lucky. The Wolverines have 4 already this year. If they get the 5th in this game, they're on their way to a win and cover.
Absolutely. They've been tremendous in all phases thus far this season, certainly a national title contender. We'll see how James Franklin's team does on the road in Ann Arbor on Saturday. Like I said, plus 19 right now are the Penn State Nittany Lions. I'm going to push down the rotation to a game, Teddy, where I don't understand the line move. Perhaps you're on the opposite side of my thinking, but I'd like to get your opinion on 381, 382. South Carolina at Kentucky. Game opened. South Carolina, Will Muschamp's group, -2. Immediately bet. This isn't something that gradually made its way across Pick'em and over to Kentucky -2.5. This thing was slammed almost immediately, the 4.5, 5-point move toward the Kentucky side. I watched Kentucky last week. I had a vested interest in Kentucky -20.5. Raptors missed an extra point and won by 20. They got me good in that one. But they were 35-35 life and death with New Mexico State at the half. Suffered a bunch of injuries in that game, especially across the offensive line. Lost starting quarterback Drew Barker, but backup quarterback Steven Johnson came in and did a really good job. Dual threat style quarterback, can run it, can pass it. But again, Mark Stoops, the head coach here, is, quote unquote, a defensive guru, and you just don't see that with Kentucky. And when I tell you New Mexico State was unstoppable in that contest for at least a half or 2.5 quarters, they were unstoppable by Kentucky. So now we get Muschamp's defense. New quarterback for them, Brandon McElwain, right? He, too, of the dual threat variety. And South Carolina's offense isn't great. And statistically, they got murdered by East Carolina and Philip Nelson last week. However, I don't know that I see this move of something of this size toward a Kentucky team that, boy, oh boy, if a Sunbelt bottom feeder can push your defense around, then what's an SEC team going to do? I know Muschamp's offenses are usually of the plow horse variety, but I have to say that power ratings made South Carolina, at least my power rating made South Carolina a 1.5-point favorite. It looks like there's some value towards that. And I just think fundamentally South Carolina might be the right side here.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things worth noting, or that I want to touch on here. First, three things. First is I agree with you 100%. South Carolina should be favored in this game. Second is that I'm not overly concerned. You talked about the huge line move right from the get-go. And I'm going to disagree with the nuance of that. Because what happened was one prominent sports book opened Kentucky South Carolina -2. And other prominent sports books opened with the Wildcats as the favorite in that ballgame. And what happened was the market said, no, that book, you guys that opened Kentucky as the dogs, you're wrong. Kentucky, yeah, and they bet Kentucky at that book, but the whole market didn't move like crazy. Just that one book got pounded, and the books that copy from that one book. There's no reason not to mention it. It's bookmaker, and the most influential book when it comes to the opening numbers. But they're not the only book when it comes to opening numbers. Other books posted, including here in Las Vegas, and all of them had Kentucky as the chalk. So that big line move, yes, but it was one group of bettors at one book, not the whole market, like some of the other games we're going to talk about where the whole market's gone nuts in favor of one team or the other. That being said, did you see the quote from Stoops last week? Prior to New Mexico State? Prior to New Mexico State, he says, Stoops says, I'm going to get my hands all over the defense this week. You can count on me being more involved on the defense.
That's right.
Because he's a defensive guru, right? And what happened? A bottom-tier Sunbelt team up and down the field against Kentucky. That's not a team I can lay points with. It's Florida or pass. South Carolina or pass for me. It's definitely not Florida or pass if we talk that game. But it's Gamecock, and I know the Gamecocks stink, but I will not lay points with Kentucky. Not going to happen this year, at least not this week for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm watching Kentucky, and then just seeing the injury situation for that team makes matters worse. It's a thin offensive line to begin with to have those types of injuries. We'll see. Obviously, the game hit 2.5 and has stonewalled. So there's just not a lot of aggressive takers at this point in time. We'll see if take-back happens. I wouldn't be surprised if South Carolina money shows up on game day. Let's talk a couple quick Pac-12s here, Teddy, that are of interest. California and Arizona State. Again, like the Big Ten, this conference played 9 conference games, so they're shifting into conference play right now. We've seen virtually the same style results out of both of these teams all season long, although Arizona State was life and death with Texas San Antonio last week. They did come from behind and get that victory, but up until the end, it was questionable. Texas San Antonio played with a lot of enthusiasm, and Arizona State came out very flat off of that 68-point performance against Texas Tech. California and Sonny Dykes, boy, that defense is a sieve. I mean, we saw it in Australia to open the season against Hawaii. We've seen it since then, but they did manage to get past Texas at home in Berkeley last week. They just flat-out scored the Longhorns, and perhaps that's a product of the Longhorns having to go on the road for the first time. But their defense, that's in the notebook too. That Texas defense is no good either. They got past Notre Dame without playing much defense. They couldn't get past Cal without playing much defense. Total here, Teddy, I mean, we do see on occasion now these totals that are in the 80s, and this one continues to get pushed up there's been no take back off the opener of 81. I see 83.5 in a couple of spots in Las Vegas right now. Is there anything to shun you away from playing these two teams up and over the total? It is a conference game, and conference games do tend to get a little bit tighter, but I don't know that either one of these teams shows you any reason to back off. However, one mistake or two on a drive, and you're not hitting 83.5, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what did we have, 48, 46 last year?
Mm-hmm.
680 yards of offense for Cal, 586 yards of offense for Arizona State. There's little reason to expect anything different this time around. This has the feel of a last team with the ball is going to win and or cover. Because I don't trust either defense to make stops. As we start getting into week 4, week 5, week 6 of the college football season, and you really start getting a much better idea of which defenses are capable of stopping good offenses and which ones aren't, my focus the first couple of weeks of the season tends to be more on teams that are scoring. The offenses are clicking. As the season matures a little bit, my focus tends to go towards the teams that can get stopped, the defensive teams, because, again, they're not getting the hype the way the offensive teams are as the season, moves into its middle stages. That being said, I don't know if I trust either one of these teams to make it up. It looks cheap to me on the Arizona State side. Cal, as you mentioned, they're not just bad defensively. They're horrific defensively. They're not going to get a whole lot of stops against anybody that they play. You can run against them. You can pass against them, and Arizona State's certainly capable of doing all of that. But the one thing that I've seen from the Bears, and it stood out to me in the game at San Diego State, it's hard to stop this squad, even against a good defense. They can chuck it, and they're just going to keep throwing it around. So, total's at 83.5 here for a reason, Rob. I'm not betting this game under.
Yeah, no, and like I say, we do more frequently see totals because of the way offenses are now. At least maybe one a week where we have an 80 spot that, they scare some guys off. But I don't know. The point being here, Teddy, and I'm glad you made the point, is that, you don't have to be afraid because that number is 80. It looks large, but these teams make it look very small by halftime. If you're playing the Arizona State side, maybe you just need Vic on Weary to break away, see goalposts, and drop the ball on the 1-yard line to the end zone. That might help you out a little bit. Last one we'll cover here, Teddy, then we'll both get out of here. Stanford and UCLA. I've made the point on various shows this week about what I feel is the difference between the two opponents Stanford has played last 2 weeks, USC and UCLA, aside from off the field and extenuating circumstances stuff. Just fundamentally, to me, we've seen now that USC, in my opinion, is a finesse team. They got physically whipped by Alabama, and then they go and play Stanford, another team that's extremely physical, and they get whipped by Stanford. However, to me, Jim Mora has built a pretty stout defense now. UCLA has worn the soft tag for a long time, and I don't feel like they're soft anymore. Eddie Vanderdoes, back at defensive tackle, missed all of last year, has helped certainly. The problem for this team still remains that Josh Rosen isn't quite up to par with his brand new receiving core, and we see that with UCLA. They sputter on offense right now. I feel like they wish they could have played Stanford 5 weeks from now. Stanford in this game lays 3. I think it's to their advantage to play this game early in the season. And go ahead and give me your take on Stanford UCLA.
Well, you talk about what the Bruins' problem is, and I just am digging on this week. This is what I found for UCLA. You look at their penalty rank, the number of penalties they've had under Jim Mora. 2012, yards per game, they're over 90 yards per game. They ranked dead last in all of college football. 2013, they ranked 122, 73 yards a game in penalties. 2014, they ranked 120th. 2015, they ranked 116th. Jim Mora is 0-5 straight up, 1-4 against the spread against David Shaw. They've lost those games by an average of 10 points per game against the spread. So it's been a pretty significant margin. I said that it's a 5-0 straight up, 4-1 ATS for Shaw against Mora. And you say, well, how does that happen? That happens because Stanford plays clean football and UCLA gets called for penalties. And the easiest way to lose to Stanford is to make mistakes because that team rarely beats themselves. And throughout the Mora era, look, UCLA's got plenty of talent. They've got an NFL quarterback who could be the number 1 overall draft choice. They're fine in the trenches against a team like Stanford. If they don't shoot themselves in the foot, this is a game UCLA can win. But the Bruins have had a lot of problems with shooting themselves in the foot. Now, for Stanford, you have, a young quarterback, Ryan Burns, ready to get his first big road test. I'm not convinced that he's 100% ready. Here's a quote from David Shaw about his QB. You can't just take 4 years of high school, throw them out the window, and become a West Coast drop-back quarterback. This is a different world for Ryan. He had to learn how to make reads. He had to learn how to manipulate the run game. That to me is not a bet-on quote from a head coach who's a little bit worried about his young QB making his first collegiate road start.
Absolutely huge game in the Pac-12. The only thing that maybe it's missing is the fact that it's not divisional, but look for that one to be a good one. Stanford at UCLA. Teddy, always appreciate your time. You can find Teddy's work, as I said earlier, both of our work at sportsmemo.com. You can find Teddy at numerous other places. You can also find additional stuff from myself at robvenosports.com. Follow Teddy on Twitter at Teddy_covers. Teddy, glad to have you this week. I look forward to talking to you again next Thursday.
Always a pleasure, Rob. Best of luck to you and, of course, to our entire listening audience.
That'll do it for our Thursday conversation with Teddy Covers. We'll see everybody back again next Thursday.